friends, welcome to the Purple Zone, where public policy, practice, and people meet. Because policy isn't abstract, it's personal. So let's talk about it.
Greetings, everyone. It's Alexis, and I'm so excited to welcome you to the Purple Zone, my refreshed podcast that was once called The Our Kids, Our Schools and has now kind of morphed into this 2.0 experience. I'm really excited to start this new season because this podcast is really aligning things that I'm really interested in and things that I have heard, conversations and stuff that I've heard from around the state, which is how do these policies that are created on a national, state, and local level, how are these public policies impacting us as people? So this show is all about creating that bridge between policy, the practices that we experience, and we, the people that are being impacted by the policies. So where did this come from? This originated when I started a PhD program in public policy and administration at Boise State 2 years ago. And fingers crossed, I am halfway through my program. And I say that because it's a program that doesn't actually have a specified amount of time. They give you like 10 years to do it, but I'm 2 years in, and I think I can get it done in the next 2 years, which is really exciting. But in the beginning of my second semester, I was taking a public administration class, and I started, we have to read lots of articles. And one of the articles was called Into the Purple Zone. And the whole premise spoke about those who are in public administration roles, so people who work for government agencies, and then those who are elected officials. And there are lots of theories about how these two groups of people should, I put air quotes around the word should be interacting with each other. And if then in this article, it basically theorized that if one group is red and one group is blue, then if those lines, if they cross and they work together, that's called the purple zone. And that's really where the magic happens. And reading that article really resonated with me because I am a former elected official, and I know what it's like to work with public administrators. And I know and have experienced that when I, as the elected official, worked and collaborated with the public administrators, it was in a school district, then that's where the magic happened, and we got so many great things done. So that's where the name for the podcast comes from, the Purple Zone. So it's really exciting. So today, it's a solo episode with me, and this is something that I'm kind of getting back to with my roots. This is where the podcast originally started, was me having conversations with all of you. And so this year, really going to be focused, like I said, on creating that bridge between policy, practice, and people, and me sharing with you some of the things that I'm learning, some of these hot takes, maybe some hot takes that are happening in our world today. And then also, I'm going to still have conversations with people because I learn a lot from bringing people in. And I'm really looking forward to some of these conversations, all of the conversations that are going to be happening around topics that matter to us. And what's great, and what I'm really excited about, is this podcast is not only going to be focused on education, because particularly here in Idaho, over 50% of our general fund is spent on education. So it's a really important topic in Idaho. There's also other areas of policy that are really interesting to me. And I know that are interesting to all of you, that you're curious about. And so we're going to meander into some of those areas like immigration and medical policies and, other different policies. There's a lot of them that happen in Idaho and around the nation. So we're going to kind of explore, I would say, those areas and create that bridge and kind of help us be more informed people. So today I'm bringing the conversation around kind of the education funding battle, and it's linked to historical components. And that's something that I have learned as I've kind of dove into some of these things that I am curious about and kind of align with some of my school stuff and also some of my work stuff. So we're going to get to that. All right. So I'm just like getting my place here on my iPad. I'm like following along. I created an outline so that I could be organized and sharing with all of you today. So for Idaho specifically, there was a funding battle for education that took place in the 1960s. And at that time, Idaho was 50th in education, in increased education spending. So I'm not saying that Idaho was 50th in the state for education spending. I'm saying that it was 50th in increasing education spending in the nation. And also at that time in Idaho, I've read that 50% of the population in Idaho in the 1960s was under 21, which was really interesting to me because now I just found some data on, it was actually from the University of Idaho, that said roughly 25% of the population in Idaho is ages 18. 18? Yeah, under the age of 18. So clearly there's been a population shift in the different categories of ages in Idaho. So the context makes sense just in terms of like when we're thinking about who's funding different things and what percent of the population we're drawing funding from, that matters. It matters to me, especially just particularly in this context. So in the 1960s, and it started actually in the 1950s, there was a council between the Teachers Association, the Parent Association, and the School Boards Association. And these three associations worked together to advocate and really help with where the state was drawing education funding from. And at that time, there was a lot of the funding was being drawn from local property taxes. And so this council worked to create a shift so that more funding for the general fund for statewide education was coming from a sales tax. And in the early 1960s, they succeeded. They added a sales tax, I think it was about 3%. So 3% sales tax was going to go to education in the state. And this was actually the reason for the kind of falling apart of this council in the mid-1960s. It had started in the early 50s. And at this point, the teachers union kind of broke, the school board trustees broke from the teachers union because the school board association had at their general meeting where all of the school board members come together and they vote on what their priorities are. And by the kind of early 1960s, there was a break for them in what their priority was, and not enough of their members voted to support the sales tax for spending. They wanted to keep that on local property taxes. So that's how the coalition, that's really when it kind of started to end. It's kind of a side note, but I do find it interesting. So anyways, this passes, and they have this sales tax now to help fund education. And what occurs next is that there are enough people in the state of Idaho that don't like this sales tax for education. And a group of citizens work to gather signatures for a referendum. And 61,000 signatures are collected in the mid-1960s to get a referendum on the ballot. So what is a referendum? A referendum is basically when a ballot measure, when basically it's a single political question that is then going to be posed to voters if they want to keep this particular item or not, or whatever is important to them. So the referendum question basically was going to be, do you support this sales tax for public education? And at that time then, as the referendum, they garnered enough signatures to get it on the ballot. The Teachers Association launched launched a campaign. And that campaign was called Save Our Schools. And that campaign included people working together, the teachers union and other like-minded advocates around the state to keep that sales tax in place for public education in Idaho. And the Save Our Schools campaign was successful. That sales tax stayed, and basically what that says is that the general voters of Idaho said, we support a sales tax for public schools in Idaho, and we want to take some of that pressure off of local property taxpayers. So that's what happened. And right now, so 60 years later, we also have another campaign in Idaho called Save Our Schools. And I thought that historical link was so interesting because now we have Save Our Schools. It's a campaign, it's a town hall essentially this group is going around the state educating Idahoans about a funding impact on education. And so here we are 60 years later having another discussion, a major statewide discussion about funding for how Idaho is funding education and how that's going to impact us as taxpayers and also our public school system. So I have had an opportunity to be a panelist and a moderator and an attendee of many of these town halls around the state. And what's really great about these town halls, and something that I really appreciate, is that it's an opportunity for patrons to attend an event that is centered around educating Idahoans so that they can be informed on issues that are happening around them. And it's not always so easy to get good quality information or know exactly where to go. And so these town halls are a great opportunity for local taxpayers to hear from people who are in the education system or who are elected officials in some type of capacity and hear their experience on how they are being impacted by this particular education funding piece. So what is this thing that I'm talking about for Save Our Schools Town Hall? Well, it's a voucher. And vouchers entered Idaho just this last legislative session. And so I want to share with you what a voucher is, why this matters to Idahoans, and how it's going to be impacting our public education system. So what is a voucher? There is a 2-question kind of litmus test that you can ask yourself when we're trying to figure out, is this a voucher? In Idaho, it's called a tax credit, and it was from House Bill 93 that we just now have a tax credit that public funds are going to private school for K-12 tuition. So the 2-question litmus test is, 1, is it public funds that are going to pay for private school tuition for kindergarten through 12th grade? If the answer is yes, then the next question is, are public school students eligible for those funds in their schooling experience? Meaning, can a public school student use those funds for any type of experience if they are enrolled in public school? And if the answer is no, then it is a voucher. And that means that a voucher comes with many different subnames. You'll hear them called a tax credit, you'll hear it called an education savings account, and there have been different proposed ideas for like a nonprofit kind of tax credit where they're paying something, like you can pay in, and there's a lot of different kind of complicated even ways that this occurs. But the academics who have been studying this for decades say, if you go through that 2-question litmus test and you get a yes for public funds to private school tuition for K-12 and a no for can public school students access those funds if they're in a public school, even if they're in it just for one class, the answer is no, then it is a voucher. So in Idaho, vouchers fall under the State Tax Commission. And if you go to the State Tax Commission website, they have a frequently asked questions page, which is great. It's super helpful. I think that's awesome. However, underneath that, one of the questions is this a voucher? And the answer that the State Tax Commission gives is no, it is a tax credit. And I think that question they answer it inaccurately. Yes, it is a voucher. Even though Idaho calls it a tax credit, the purpose of the tax credit is for parents to be able to use those funds for private school tuition. So that's a voucher. Well, why does this matter? Vouchers have a historical origin in socioeconomic segregation. And I really encourage you to go read the book, The Privateers by Dr. Josh Cowan. He has been studying vouchers for over 2 decades, and it really kind of lays out the origin of vouchers, how they've been seen and funded when they popped back up again in the 90s and early 2000s, and even why many of these states are having, why vouchers have appeared in so many of our states and now on the national level. It's really great. It does get a little dry. I hosted a book club and some of my friends read it and they were like, Alexis, this was so dry. And I was like, yeah, I know. And also it's like really quality information. So how does this impact Idaho? How is this linked to Idaho? Well, for a long time, vouchers have been trying to get into Idaho. A lot of outside money funded by a lot of wealthy organizations and nonprofits have been working to get vouchers into Idaho, like they have in many other states. And so in Idaho, during the 2025 legislative session, right before it, Governor Little said that he would support a line item up to $50 million for basically a voucher. And Governor Little said that it needed to meet a certain criteria. And I kid you not, that the criteria for this, the acronym for this is FART. Fair, accountable, responsible, and transparent. And I'll go into what that means for House Bill 93 in a moment. But basically, Governor Little said, if it meets these criteria, I'm going to sign it into law. So in comes marching House Bill 93, sponsored by Senator Den Hartog and Representative Horman. And those lawmakers they created House Bill 93 and they presented it to the House Rev and Tax Committee. And I had the opportunity, my name got called first up, and I was the first one to the podium to testify in regards to my perspective on House Bill 93. And I basically, without even going into the voucher conversation, shared that House Bill 93 did not meet Governor Little's FART standards. It was not fair. So for example, in Idaho, we fund kindergarten at full day kindergarten at 25%, meaning the state gives a local school district 25% funding for a full day of kindergarten. But House Bill 93 would allow a family to use $5,000, and if the tuition was only $5,000, then the family could pay for that, even for kindergarten. So that means that this voucher, the bill, was proposing to fund kindergarten fully. But the state doesn't fund kindergarten fully for public school students. And I argued that was not fair. I mentioned the accountability piece. Well, for public schools, they have to put in, there's so many different components that they have to submit to the state for all types of standards, testing, accountability, background checks, all sorts of things. And House Bill 93 did not require that of these public funds that were going to be to private schools. It didn't really feel responsible, and as I looked through the bill, there were many different components in terms of responsibility of funds and who was handling those and what type of reporting was going to be for those. And then transparency. So nothing about these funds were required to be shared with the state tax commission in terms of, particularly the legislature, in terms of how these funds are being used. And yet in our public schools and in all of our public agencies, they have to be extremely transparent with how funds are used. You can at any time go and see how your school district is spending their funds. And rightly so, these are our tax dollars, and we want our local districts and we want our lawmakers to be responsible with our tax funds. So House Bill 93 didn't meet these standards. That was from my perspective. And still, it passed out of the committee with an 8-7 vote. So meaning 8 supported it, 7 did not. It made it to the House floor, it passed. It made its way through the Senate side and passed. But there was a signal to the governor, which I think is really important to note. That signal was, If the governor if he chose to veto House Bill 93, the Senate and House did not have enough votes to override the governor's veto. Well, that week that it sat on the governor's desk, Governor Little asked Idahoans, how do you want me to respond to House Bill 93? And in what felt like a totally unprecedented opportunity, which was really great, the governor's office made it possible for Idahoans to call in and press a button. Yes, you want him to support it, support it, or press 2 to veto it. Well, 37,000 Idahoans called in, and 86% said Governor Little veto that bill. That week, President Trump tweeted that he supported the vouchers and that opportunity. And so Governor Little signed it into law. And when he signed it into law, there was an acknowledgement that it didn't meet the FART standard. Even though he doesn't say it that way, there was an acknowledgement that it didn't. So a couple of different essential components when we're talking about vouchers. So kind of this is your go-to if you're curious about something and you want to know what we're talking about when we're talking about vouchers. Here are some really key components for you. One, first and foremost, something that I think is so important is that the homeschool community in Idaho opposes vouchers. They are supporters of public schools, even though their kids don't go there. Their children are friends with public schools. They benefit from good public schools in their communities. And I've had lots of conversations with a lot of homeschool families, and they oppose this bill. This bill is called school choice, but let me be really clear. In Idaho, we are a national leader in education school choice. We are actually third in the nation for school choice. So this being described as school choice is inaccurate. If you go to Governor Little's website, he will tell you that Idaho has 9 different school choice options. So paying for private school is not school choice. It is supporting a particular type of school choice. And let me be really clear. I think that a private school option is great. My family has used it. I just don't think that the state should be funding private school choice. But you can have your own opinion, by the way. I'm totally okay if you disagree with me. There's plenty of people who disagree with me, but I just want to make sure I get all this information out. So additionally, 94% of Idaho kids attend public school. We've got a small percentage that do homeschool and roughly about 4 or 5% that attend private school. So one might think, okay, well, that's not very much that attend private school. It's true. Not very many people in Idaho attend private school, and yet a lot of public dollars are going to be going to pay for that private school choice. Most private schools in Idaho are in the Treasure Valley. 70% of our school districts are rural, meaning they're not in the Treasure Valley. So yes, there are some private schools as you move north into Lewiston, Moscow, and the Coeur d'Alene area, and there are also private schools in the south and the eastern part of Idaho. There's not very many in those areas. The bulk of them exist in the Treasure Valley. So this voucher really is an opportunity to only support kids you're mostly supporting kids in the Treasure Valley, which is a disservice to the 70% of our rural school districts that don't have access to this. And yet I'm going to tell you in a little bit how they're going to be impacted by this funding withdrawal from the general fund. The funding withdrawal, meaning that when these funds come in, they operate like a tax credit. So all of the funds come into this big general pot. And then the first things that go out are tax credits. So that's where your grocery tax credits go out. Everyone loves that good tax credit. And now the voucher tax credit's going to go out. So now what was $50 million in the general fund is going to be withdrawn before it's even there. So the legislature will not see those funds. And just recently, Governor Little said that all pretty much, I read through the really long list, all departments except the Department of Ed need 3% cutbacks to their budgets midway. And Governor Little is accurate that Idaho cares about balancing a budget. And one could also argue that some of the decisions that have been made up to this point are impacting the reasons behind needing those funding cuts, those cutbacks. So I read in an article that Representative Horman said the purpose behind her desire to do a voucher was to support children in low socioeconomic groups. And I think that that is a very noble reason to support something that is going to potentially help that category of people. However, data shows that 70% of students who receive the vouchers are already kids who attend private schools, meaning those are already families that can afford to send their kids to private schools. Additionally, data shows that when a student, particularly in a low socioeconomic category, goes over, let's say they use the voucher funds and they go over to a private school, and then what often happens is they leave that private school and they go back to public schools. Those students are behind grade level because private schools they're on different standards. They're teaching different things, and they're not accountable for making sure that a student is at a specific level. So the premise that it is going to help lower socioeconomic groups has been debunked by data. Then the other thing that is important to note just in terms of funding is that private schools are going to increase their tuition. And this was stated actually during a committee meeting hearing at the legislature where one of I'm not quite sure if they're like called a principal or a chancellor, but basically he said that they would increase their tuition because they have to cover their costs too. And a private school in the Treasure Valley, they have a funding scale for their tuition, and in their funding scale, the lowest group that they basically give it's like a scholarship to, that lowest group only has to pay $1,500 for tuition. But just this summer, they increased that lowest amount, that amount for that lowest group to $6,500. Meaning that the lowest group now has the $1,500 plus the $5,000 that the state is going to give students if you qualify to get the $5,000 voucher. So that means that the low socioeconomic group is still on the hook for $1,500. The voucher, that $5,000 voucher, is not going to help that family attend that private school. As a matter of fact, if they don't qualify, if they don't get that tax credit in time, they're on the hook for $6,500. So I just think it's not a knock on the private school that they are increasing their funding. It's a private school, it's a business. They can charge what they want, and I'm not criticizing that at all. But what I am saying is what voucher opponents said would happen and what academics and researchers said would happen, because it's happened in other areas, is happening in Idaho. Tuition costs are going up because vouchers are available in Idaho. Then another component, who really chooses? So in our public school settings, all students are welcome in public schools. A public school by law is required to accept all students, and they're happy to do that. They accept all kids. But in a private school setting, the schools choose the students. So when they say, oh, it's about school choice, well, if we want to play with words, that's true, because the schools get to choose what students they want to have. Let me tell you about a couple of different examples. One, my husband and I sent one of our kids to a private school this last year for a semester, and it was great. And our child loved it, and it was a great place for our kid. It was awesome. But when we started at that school, we told a couple of our family and friends about going there. And what we heard was, oh yeah, so a couple of students were tagged as maybe having some extra needs that were beyond what that school could support. And so those students were let go. And it was hard for those families because it happened mid-year and they weren't quite sure how they were going to meet the needs of their kids. And those families some of them ended up putting their kids back in public schools because public schools accept all of those kids. Additionally, I want to be really careful as I share this experience, because this in no way impacts my feelings in regards to vouchers, but it is a personal experience of how private schools will not choose a student based on their criteria. So a couple of years ago, we applied to get one of our kids into a private school. We went through the process and we were rejected from that private school because we were the wrong brand of Christian. And what is true is that my husband and I were in the process of potentially not choosing that school. We were kind of on the fence, but we wanted to see, gosh, could this be an option for us? And what we found out was it wasn't an option for us because we were the wrong brand of Christian. Additionally, at that House Rev and Tax Committee meeting I told you that I testified at, I heard a private school principal was asked by one of the committee members. The question was, do you accept differing faiths? And the response was, we accept those of Christian faith. So they accept Christian students. And to me, that is, if we're looking at public funds, those are discriminatory policies. If you are a private business, you get to do what you want when it comes to who you want to accept. But now these schools are using public funds and they aren't taking certain students. And there's nothing really right now. There's nothing that we can do about it other than we know about it, we're hearing about it. And I mean, it's just, I think clearly, I think it's unfortunate. I can stop saying that I think it's unfortunate. Other things that I'm hearing, what is possible, and this is happening down in Texas, for example, is that school board, if private schools, some of them have school boards, and it is okay for those school board members to be given contracts to build different things in the school, getting different construction contracts. And one could argue that that's nepotism, and that is not permissible in our public schools, meaning if you're a school board member and you are even potentially linked to a decision that is going to be even remotely connected to you, the expectation is that you withdraw from that decision and that you recuse yourself from it. You have to leave the room to make that decision. So that is not happening at private schools. And if what we've seen is if it happens in one state, it essentially meanders and happens to all the states that are, that have vouchers. Okay, also the current state of special education. So right now, public schools are required, they're always required, if a family wants special education testing done for their student, the school district has to do that. And the school district covers the cost for that. So with this voucher, a family can get $5,000 for a general ed student, and they can get $7,500 for a special education student. So there are a lot of families that are going to their public school and saying, I want my child tested for special education. And then what they plan to do is they're going to get that, if they get that yes, that their child is in special ed, then they're going to apply for that tax credit for $7,500. And right now, I am only aware of one private school in the entire Treasure Valley that is specifically geared towards special education students. All the other private schools generally don't take special education students, in part because they don't have the staffing to help meet their needs. Again, that's not a criticism. That's simply, it is a school that cannot meet the needs of all the kids. Let's see, what else was there? There were a couple of other things that I was going to say. Oh yes, one of the arguments that I hear for funding for vouchers is that the fund should follow the kid. That's one argument that I've heard a lot. And the general idea for that, the general premise from my perspective is totally inaccurate, meaning I'm a taxpayer, I contribute to the general fund, and that general fund is just a mosh of, the legislature gets to decide what they want to do with that. And my money goes in with a lot of other people's, every other money around the state. And also, I live in the Treasure Valley, and I don't drive on roads in northern Idaho. And I don't use, knock on wood, I don't use police services. And I've never, I have a friend who has never had, the fire department come to their house. So does that mean then I don't have to pay for those public use needs? No, that's not what that means. We don't have a pick and choose a la carte system. One could argue that your local tax dollars, you can see exactly where those are going to your public school. So I did hear someone say, well, you could technically make that argument that you can see where you can see your local tax property dollars going. Maybe that is an argument. But really, in essence, the whole concept is no, the public funds don't follow kids into private school because many taxpayers are not paying $5,000 to $7,500 just for their one kid. Meaning, with this House Bill 93 system, there is no cap on how much you can receive if you have that many kids. Meaning, if someone had 5 kids and they wanted to send their 5 kids somewhere, or they wanted to do a micro school, they could withdraw $25,000 from that tax credit. And I have heard people argue, except I don't know any Idahoan that is paying $25,000 if they have 5 kids into the general fund for their kids. So no, the money following the child, that argument falls apart when we really break it apart and look at it on that level. Just a couple of other things. In Arizona, where vouchers have been for a really long time, public schools are closing. So the academics are saying a state cannot support funding 2 different systems. It cannot support funding a private school system and a public school system. And that's what's happening in Arizona. And so public schools are not closing because the enrollment is so low. They're closing because they can't keep funding these schools. And so they have to, then they're having overcrowding experiences in schools for the other students. So that's unfortunate. And then the concept of who pays. Well, when there's less money going to public education from the general fund, from the state, it's the local property tax owners that pay that end up making the difference. And this was the argument back with the OG Save Our Schools, that they wanted to remove that burden from local property taxpayers. And I have heard that from so many lawmakers, that they want to remove that burden to the local property taxpayers. But that's not what's going to be happening with vouchers, particularly, in all of our school districts, but particularly in our rural school districts. They're going to be the hardest hit because they don't have private schools in those areas. They're going to potentially be receiving less money from the state because less money is going into the general fund. And so then less money is going to go to that local school district. And when that local school district still has to pay all of its bills, it's going to the local property tax owners are going to be the one who make up that difference. So then it is so that's all the information there. There's so many, and by the way, there are so many more different components to vouchers. But when I look at this, I think about fiscal and moral questions when it comes to vouchers. So just things to ask yourself. All right, so first, let's look at curriculum content. In Idaho, the State Department of Education approves curriculum. And let's say for math, they approve 5 different curriculum options. That means then that the local school district gets to choose from one of those 5 options, those state-approved options that are going to then be taught in that school district. So school districts do get the choice of choosing what curriculum they want, but it's also based on state standards and what the state has approved. It's extremely transparent. You can go ask for it, you can look it up, you can see all of those different things. It's transparent. But for curriculum in our private schools, it is not. And our private schools can teach whatever they want. And now public dollars are going to private schools, and some of our private schools are teaching things like a girl's place is only in the home, and her purpose is to bear children. Now, I'm not going to argue one moral way or the other. It's not a do I think this is right or wrong. It's the fact of the matter is this is what is being taught. And additionally, what is being taught for that is that the 19th Amendment should be repealed. And so we have, and the 19th Amendment, by the way, is a woman's right to vote. So there are private schools in Idaho, one in particular that I know of, that is teaching that a girl's responsibility is to only bear children, and that a woman's right to vote should be removed, and that it should be the head of household, that they vote based on household, and that head of household is the man, and that the woman needs to bow to the man's wishes. And I am not here to say that you should or should not agree with that premise, but what is interesting, and it is a moral question posed, do you think that public funds should be going to pay to a private school that is teaching that curriculum? Because I know that that is not being taught in public schools, and so it's a moral question for you to answer for yourself. Another one, just in terms of fiscal responsibility, is in Idaho, the special education funding is short $82 million, meaning the state is short funding special education to local districts by $82 million. And also, now we're paying $50 million for vouchers. So is it ethical and is it fiscally responsible to be paying out for something when the state hasn't met its lawful responsibility in funding special education completely? It's another question for you to answer for yourself. And then just in terms of the taxpayer fairness analogy, which I kind of mentioned, we don't get to pick and choose what we fund. So is it fair to choose what public services we pay for? And it was that police officer analogy. Well, actually, no, this is a little bit different than earlier. So the police officer analogy, which is, okay, so my public funds right now go to pay for police officers in my community. And right now, my police officers, in my community, I live next to a road that has a lot of accidents on it. There was an accident 1 week apart, just 2 weeks ago. And the police officers were out there, directing traffic and helping those involved in the accident. And I see a lot of police officers out on the road and they keep my community safe. And I see so many things about this. I see my police officers working all the time for this. Well, the police officer analogy is, I could say, well, I see that those police officers are out there, except I don't feel safe enough in my community. I want a private security detail for me. And I want my private home security detail at my home because I don't feel safe enough even with all these police officers here. It's not good enough for me. I want this other thing over here. And so then essentially the same premise is with the voucher argument for education. It's okay, well, I want a privately funded police detail for me. I want a private security system. That argument is a different view of the premise of a voucher for private education. So again, is that ethical and is it fiscally responsible? That's something for you to answer for yourself. So this kind of call to action, what can you do? So now I have spoken at length about vouchers, what they are, what they do, what their essential components are, and how they are impacting Idaho, and questions for you to ask yourself. So you can, right now, there's lots of town halls going on around the state in different areas. You can find out where those are and attend and ask your questions to your local community members. It's a great opportunity for you to go. And you can learn the kind of a better full picture of education funding in Idaho. Learn how that works. You can show up for the May 2026 primaries. This is when the primaries determine a major portion of outcomes in Idaho, and yet only a small portion of Idahoans vote in the primaries. And I'm here to tell you that I love the phrase, it's my primaries 2026. So hashtag it's my primaries. I'm telling you, and I want to encourage you to go register to vote and go vote in the May primaries so you can help determine who your local lawmakers are going to be. Those decisions matter for us. And additionally, there's going to be a lot of school board positions on the ballot this November. So I want to encourage you to find out who's running for your local school board, and do your members of your school board, do they support vouchers? Because I know in Idaho, there are some school board members that support vouchers. And it's an interesting concept to me that they are a governing individual for school districts and they support vouchers. So again, it's a question. It's a fair question to ask yourself, and also a fair question for you to ask someone who's running for your school board. And lastly, I just want to acknowledge that some of you, as my listeners, and I so appreciate you listening, are going to disagree with me. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with you disagreeing with me. My big thing is, I think it's so important to be educated on issues, be educated on things that are happening around us in our communities, and understand this policy practice to people. What is this link that is there? And that it's so important for us to model dignity in our disagreement. I want to invite you, your curiosity, your questions, and your continued engagement. I want to invite all of those things as you are meandering around your day, whether you're engaging with my content or anyone else's content. I have a past episode that's all about the Dignity Index, and one of the things that I saw that I was really, I'm not quite sure exactly what the word I would use is, but I was glad to see that when I saw Senator Den Hartog present as she presented House Bill 93 on the Senate floor, she just said, she was like, you know what, I'm looking forward to a robust discussion and dialogue around this topic. What she was doing in that moment was modeling dignity. And I just think that that's so important to model that dignity as we come and have topics that we disagree on. So it's a great conversation with the Dignity Index, actually, that I had with the co-creator, Tammy Pfeiffer. So I want to encourage you to go watch that or listen. Then just kind of re-emphasizing what the Purple Zone is, and I'm so excited about this. This is bridging policy, practice, and people. And I have an upcoming episode. I'm so excited about it. It's an expert on ed tech and AI, and we're going to be talking about AI in education. Got a conversation about immigration coming up, a conversation about voting, school board members, so many great things. If you have your suggestion or ideas, or you're curious about something, please reach out and let me know. And I just want to say thank you so much for joining me on my season opener of the Purple Zone. Cheers to all of you. And that's a wrap.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of the Purple Zone. Thanks for being here. If you liked what you heard, leave a review on your fave podcast app or on YouTube. And from me to you, the heart of the Purple Zone says community is where policy comes to life.